But I lost it there for a second. So what's the first thing you would do if I gave you $1 million, told you to hang on to it for a while? Not sure when I'm going to be back. It could be a while. What's the first thing you would do? What would be your greatest fear? What would you do if I gave you an envelope with $3 million or $5 million? I have distributed 3 envelopes amongst the congregation this morning. I want to invite you that I gave those envelopes to open them up. Open up your envelope. Stand up where you are. Tell me how much you got. $1 million right here. How much there? $3 million. Jerry? $5 million. I won't make you stand during the whole sermon. See, in life we are not given the same gifts. Some get more, some get less. There's nothing equal about it. I think this gospel lesson is trying to tell us that it is what we do with our gifts that makes all the difference. Do we bury what God has given us? Use it. Do we bury it out in the backyard out of fear, or do we risk what God has given us and use it even if we might lose it? There's a poem that describes the strategy for the life of the $1 million servant. Who was 1 million? It goes like this. There was a very cautious man who never laughed or played. He never risked, he never tried, he never sang or prayed. When he passed away, his insurance was denied. For since he never really lived, they claimed he never died. You cannot reach your full potential with your efforts crippled by caution. Mark Twain once said, even if you're on the right track, you will get run over if you just sit there. The 1-talent servant did not invest himself or his resources, so he inherited what he invested, which was nothing. The 1-talent man did one thing well: make excuses. He said, in effect, because I knew your expectations were so high, that made me nervous and afraid, so I buried your money in the ground. You may have heard the story of a mediocre golfer who went out to one of those benefit gold tournaments. He stepped up to the first tee. Lots of people were standing around watching. This man swung at the ball and missed it entirely. We call it a whiff. Now, I would ask for a show of hands of all who've ever whiffed the ball, but that might tempt some of you to lie. The man was embarrassed. He stepped back, took a practice swing, stepped up to the ball, whiffed it again. People started to snicker. He stepped back, went through his ritual again, whiffed it a third time. Then he turned to the crowd and said, "This is the hardest course I've ever played." Of course, that had nothing to do with it. Nor did the master's high expectations cause the failure of the 1-talent man. Fred Craddock said the major themes of Christian faith are caring, giving, witnessing, trusting, loving, hoping. They cannot be understood or lived without risk. Catholic theologian John Shedd says there is a ship. It's in the harbor, it's safe, but that's not what ships are for. So also a silent Christian is safe, but that's not what Christians are for. One commentator says that he believes most of us are like that 1-talent servant here. Most of us would like to think we're like the $3 or the $5 million servants. But in reality, most of us are afraid to risk losing the great gifts God's given us. So we too get out our shovels and dig a hole and bury our million at night when the neighbors aren't looking. See, I believe risking is mandatory for Christians. To give yourselves away like God gives himself away is risky. To care for one another, to serve one another, to love without a guarantee of being loved back is a scary thing. It'd be much easier to not do anything. The master said to the one talent man, "At least you could have put my money in the bank and earned a little interest." The implication is that there are lots of other investments that perhaps could have brought a higher return, but with a greater risk. The point is, we must not fear the risk. In his book, The Shrew Tapes Letters by C.S. Lewis, the devil briefs his young nephew, Wormwood, in a series of letters on the subtleties and techniques of tempting people. In his writings, the devil says the objective is not to make people wicked, but to make them indifferent. The devil gives his instruction to his nephew. He says, "I, the devil, will always see to it that there are bad people. Your job, my dear Wormwood, is to provide me with people who do not care." There's a story of the worst nightmare of every mother. It happened to a Memphis woman a few years ago. A woman named Anita was stopped at a traffic light at the corner of Highland and Southern. Suddenly, a stranger opened the backside door of her car, grabbed her 2-month-old baby, and ran. Anita's instincts took over. She slammed the car into park, jumped out, and ran after the man. A terrified mother can move at lightning speed. When she caught him, he threw the baby into a ditch and kept on running. Miraculously, the baby was not hurt. Thinking about it later, Anita talked about one fact that surprised and saddened her. She said, "This happened in broad daylight, 3:30 in the afternoon. My car was the first one in a traffic light. There are probably 20 cars in 2 lanes behind me. Not one person did anything to help." And you can guess what went through the minds of those other drivers. This could be a domestic dispute. He might have a gun. He could be on drugs. "I'm in a hurry. I sure don't need to be picking a fight right now. Where are those police when you need them?" But after you take all those excuses into account, somebody should have helped, regardless of the risk. There are certain times in life when you look the risk squarely in the eye and you do something anyway. Each of us is given different gifts to risk, to invest, different skills. What are you doing with yours? But when the master returned, he summoned his 3 servants to learn the status of the funds he had entrusted with them, and he was unimpressed with the 3rd servant's strategy. 2 servants wholeheartedly plunged into the challenge. They risked all the master had given them in order to make the greatest possible gains. They were praised. They were rewarded with more responsibilities, ultimately invited to enter into the joy of your master. But the play-it-safe strategy adopted by the 3rd servant earned him a rebuke, a label of wicked and lazy, thrust him into the outer darkness far away from the joy of his master. In taking no risk, he had risked it all and lost. See, I believe your gifts, your skills, your talents are worth millions. But if you don't do something with them, don't risk rejection, risk failure, they're worth nothing. Do not be afraid. What have you got to lose? The world needs the gift that you have. If you don't use it, nobody else will. Amen.